Well, hello. How are you this fine gray day? I would like to read to you again. I was planning on reading some of the Faerie Queene, which I'm nearly finished the first book of the Faerie Queene. But then today, this afternoon, I've been reading The Day Boy and the Night Girl, otherwise known as The History of Photogen and Nycteris. Which is a fairy tale by George MacDonald, and I really enjoyed reading it. It was one of perhaps the first time that I've actually read it entirely from the page. I've definitely read parts of it from the page before, but largely I've listened to this story since there's some very good audio recordings available of it. Um, it's a beautiful story. Um, I want to read. Well, I'll probably read a little bit of the very opening lines, but mostly I want to read from one of my favorite chapters. Um, so it begins. It's a story of it begins the first section called Watho, introducing. Um, well, I suppose I could read that for itself. There was once a witch who desired to know everything, but the wiser a witch is, the harder she knocks her head against the wall when she comes to it. Her name was Watho, and she had a wolf in her mind. She cared for nothing in itself, only for knowing it. She was not naturally cruel, but the wolf had made her cruel. And so, so then it goes on. Essentially, she kidnaps two children as they are born, and raises them each in sort of opposite ways. Where the boy is completely raised in the daylight, and the girl is essentially completely kept and raised in this essentially a tomb underneath her castle, the sort of cave. And that's where it gets kind of playing with the idea of like Plato's cave, where people are sort of trapped and only see like shadows of the real world. In her case, her name is Nycteris. In her case, she has relief sculpture that she sees by the very dim light, and I suppose feels with her hands. Are kind of her images of the world outside, as well as a few books. She does have access to a few books, and is told some things, but not told everything about the world at large. Um, and so I wanted to read a part later, the first part, where Nycteris first manages to leave this sort of tomb-like existence that she's been raised in. And in the chapter right before this, her lamp. There's maybe an earthquake. I don't think it's clarified exactly how it's broken, but the dim alabaster lamp that she is like to her all the light she's ever known. Um, it falls from the ceiling and like breaks on the floor, and this is what finally motivates her to kind of feel her way out, and she manages by good fortune, um, to find a way out of this sort of like tomb like room that she has been raised in, and eventually to get further out. Okay, so initially getting out, it's still perfectly dark. It says here, but alas, out was very much like in, for the same enemy, the darkness, was here also. The next moment, however, came a great gladness. A firefly which had wandered in from the garden. She saw the tiny spark in the distance, the slowing, pulsing ebb and throb of the light. It came pushing itself through the air, drawing nearer and nearer with that motion which more resembles swimming than flying. And the light seemed the source of its own motion. My lamp, cried Nycteris. It is the shininess of my lamp which the cruel darkness drove out. My good lamp has been waiting for me here all the time. It knew I would come after it and waited to take me with it. She followed the firefly, which, like herself, was seeking the way out. It did not know the way. It was yet light. And because all light is one, any light may serve to guide to more light. If she was mistaken in thinking, if it the spirit of her lamp, it was yet of the same spirit as her lamp, and had wings. The gold-green jet boat, driven by light, went throbbing before her through a long, narrow passage. Suddenly it rose higher, and at the same moment Nycteris fell upon an ascending stair. She had never seen a stair before, and found going up a curious sensation. Just as she reached what seemed the top, the firefly ceased to shine, and so disappeared. She was in utter darkness once more. But when we are following the light, even its extinction is a guide. If the firefly had gone on shining, Nycteris would have seen the stair turn, and would have gone up to Watho's bedroom. Whereas now, feeling straight before her, she came to a latched door, which after a good deal of trying she managed to open, and stood in a maze of wondering perplexity, awe, and delight. What was it? Was it outside of her, or something taking place in her head? Before her was a very long and very narrow passage, broken up she could not tell how, and spreading out above and on all sides to an infinite height and breadth and distance, as if space itself were growing out of a trough. It was brighter than her rooms had ever been, brighter than if 6 alabaster lamps had been burning in them. There was a quantity of strange streaking and mottling about it, very different from the shapes on her walls. She was in a dream of pleasant perplexity, of delightful bewilderment. She could not tell whether she was upon her feet or drifting about like the firefly, driven by the pulses of an inward bliss. But she knew little as yet of her inheritance. Unconsciously, she took one step forward from the threshold, and the girl who had been from her very birth, a troglodyte, stood in the ravishing glory of a southern night, lit by a perfect moon. Not the moon of our northern clime, but a moon like the silver glowing in a furnace. A moon one could see to be a globe not far off, a mere flat disk on the face of the blue, but hanging down halfway and looking as if one could see all around it by the mere bending of the neck. "It is my lamp," she said, and stood dumb with parted lips. She looked and felt as if she had been standing there in silent ecstasy from the beginning. "No, it is not my lamp," she said after a while. "It is the mother of all the lamps." And with that, she fell on her knees and spread out her hands to the moon. She could not in the least have told what was in her mind, but the action was in reality just a begging of the moon to be what she was. That precise, incredible splendor hung in the far-off roof, that very glory essential to the being of the poor girls born and bred in caverns. It was a resurrection, nay, a birth itself to Nycteris. What the vast blue sky, studded with tiny sparks like the heads of diamond nails, could be, what the moon, looking so absolutely content with light, why, she knew less about them than you and I. But the greatest of astronomers might envy the rapture of such a first impression at the age of 16. Immeasurably imperfect it was, but the impression could not be. For she saw with the eyes made for seeing, and saw indeed what many men are too wise to see. As she knelt, something softly flapped her, embraced her, stroked her, fondled her. She rose to her feet, but saw nothing. She did not know what it was. It was like a woman's breath, for she knew nothing of the air even, and had never breathed the still newborn freshness of the world. Her breath had come to her only through long passages and spirals in the rock. Still less did she know of the air alive with motion of that thrice-blessed thing, the wind of a summer night. It was like a spiritual wine, filling her whole being with an intoxication of purest joy. To breathe was a perfect existence. It seemed to her the light itself she drew into her lungs. Possessed by the power of the gorgeous night, she seemed at the same moment annihilated and glorified. She was in the open passage or gallery that ran round the top of the garden walls between the cleft battlements. But she did not once look down to see what lay beneath. Her soul was drawn to the vault above her, with its lamp and endless room. At last she burst into tears, and her heart was relieved, as the night itself is relieved by its lightning and rain. I love that passage. And I feel like even reading it to you now, reading it aloud, I've noticed more things about it that I hadn't even noticed before. More moments or more like uses of particular words. Uh, it is a beautiful story that I love returning to, and will continue to love returning to. Anyway, my tea has gotten very cold, but it is still good. And if you would like, have a blueberry before you go. So I will see you around, and have a good one. Cheers.